It started like every perfect weekend should. Sunlight cutting through pine trees, birds chirping, and the calm ripples of the lake tapping against the dock. My cabin sat right on the edge of the water, nestled in a quiet cove that barely showed up on most maps. No crowds, no noise, and most importantly, no HOA jurisdiction. The place had been in my family for generations. My grandfather built the original dock by hand. My father expanded the cabin when I was a teenager. And when it came into my hands, I upgraded the plumbing, added solar panels, and kept the same old guest book that had pages going back to the 70s. This wasn't just a cabin. It was our escape. So when I invited a few friends and some cousins for the weekend, it didn't feel like anything unusual. Just 10 or 12 people spread across a 3-bedroom cabin, sitting around the fire pit, grilling burgers, laughing, tossing fishing lines off the dock. No music blasting, no late-night yelling. Just adults enjoying the peace that city life couldn't offer. By Saturday morning, the lake was glassy and quiet. A couple of kids skipped stones. Someone brought out pancakes from the kitchen. My dog, Max, rolled in the grass like he'd been waiting all year for that moment. And then came the stare. Across the cove, on the far side where the newer homes lined the hill, I noticed a woman with short-cut hair and a clipboard pacing along the shoreline. Sunglasses on, phone in hand. The kind of posture that didn't say, "I'm enjoying the lake." More like, "I'm collecting evidence." At first, I ignored her. Probably someone just out for a walk. But about 20 minutes later, I saw her again, closer now. She had circled around the water and was walking right up the boundary line where my land met the public trail. She didn't greet anyone, didn't smile, just stood there, scanning the cabin with eyes that looked like they were hunting for violations. Then she pulled out her phone and started taking pictures. I walked up calmly and asked if I could help her with something. That's when the first red flag hit me. "I'm from the HOA," she said without introducing herself by name. And we had several reports of overcrowding and loud activity at this property. That's a violation. I looked around. A couple of my friends were playing cornhole. Someone was reading a book on the porch. The only sound louder than conversation was the birds. "Ma'am," I said, "this property isn't part of your HOA. Never has been. We're on private, non-regulated land. My family's owned it since the 60s. She sniffed like that didn't matter. "Still, you're bordering the community, and there are rules about gatherings, noise, and environmental impact. You're disturbing lake access or others." I almost laughed. "Disturbing? We're not even swimming. We're cooking eggs." She frowned, held up her phone, and muttered, "I'll handle this through proper channels." Then she turned around and walked back up the trail, like she just solved a crime. That night, we didn't do anything differently. We kept the music off. We cleaned up trash. People were asleep by midnight. But by Sunday morning, the peace shattered. Blue lights flashed in the driveway. 2 sheriff's deputies stepped out of their vehicle, while a third officer spoke with someone in a silver SUV parked across the road. I didn't even have to ask who it was. There she was again, clipboard in her lap, eyes wide like she'd just reported a hostage situation. One of the deputies came up to me and asked if I was a property owner. I showed him my ID, my deed, and even offered to show guest IDs to prove everyone was either family or longtime friends. He looked confused. "Ma'am across the road said there were over 20 people packed into one house," he said, flipping through a notepad. "She said it was a rental party and that it was unsafe. Possible zoning violations." I shook my head. "This isn't a rental. These are my guests. You're welcome to walk through and count yourself." He did. He came back 10 minutes later and nodded. "Everything seems fine. No loud music. No drugs. No parking issues. Nothing illegal." The officer across the street was still talking to her, but now she wasn't yelling. She was arguing, gesturing at the cabin like she still couldn't believe it. Eventually, they left. The police thanked us for cooperating, told us to enjoy our weekend. And Karen? She drove off like she'd been robbed. But I had a strange feeling that wasn't the last time I'd see her face. The funny thing about people like her, they don't just go away when they're proven wrong. They double down. That was exactly what she did. Monday morning came, and I was still at the cabin cleaning up with 2 friends who'd stayed behind to help. We were stacking chairs, folding up hammocks, and hosing down the dock. That's when I heard the sound of tires crunching gravel. I looked up to see the same silver SUV crawling past the edge of my property, like a shark circling a boat. She didn't stop this time, just drove real slow, made direct eye contact with me, then turned around and vanished back up the hill. Not a word, no smile, no wave, just that sour expression that said, "I'm not finished." Later that day, I got the first letter. It wasn't addressed from her directly, but it came on HOA letterhead, bold and official looking, like it had weight behind it. The letter claimed that I had hosted an unpermitted gathering, caused excessive noise, and disrupted Share Lake access for neighboring residents. It even warned that future violations could result in formal action. I read the whole thing twice, then laughed out loud, because what they didn't realize was this. My cabin was outside the HOA's reach. It had never been included in their subdivision. My grandfather bought this slice of land long before their neighborhood was even built. The only shared access was a polite courtesy I'd extended for years, and even that was about to change. Still, I didn't respond right away. I wanted to see how far they'd take it. Spoiler, farther than anyone with common sense should. 2 days later, I got an email from the county office. Apparently, someone had filed a zoning complaint, said my property was being used for commercial purposes, like short-term rentals or paid events. The county inspector politely asked for clarification and documentation. I sent them everything: ownership history, utility records, photos, even a signed letter from my longtime neighbor confirming I'd never rented the place. The county replied within 24 hours, saying the matter was closed. No violations, no concerns. Strike 2, but that didn't stop Karen. The next Saturday, I returned to the cabin for a quiet solo weekend. No guests, no parties, just me and a stack of firewood. That's when I noticed something strange near the bottom of the drive. A hand-painted wooden sign stuck into ground that read, "Private property beyond this point. HOA members only." It was nailed into a post, half hidden by bushes, but still on my land. Now, that was trespassing. She had literally walked onto my property, stuck a fake sign into the ground, and tried to claim it for the HOA, like she was drawing her own lines with a paintbrush and hammer. I pulled it out, took pictures, and walked straight to the neighbor across the cove, an older man named Gerald. He'd been living in the area for decades and knew the land borders better than anyone. I showed him the sign, and he let out a low whistle. "She's really trying it, huh?" "Oh, she's trying," I said. Gerald nodded and said, "If she pushes harder, you might want to remind her who owns the boat ramp." That stopped me cold. See, I never really thought about the ramp as leverage. It had always just been there. My grandfather built it when boats were still made of wood. Over time, the newer HOA community grew along the lake, and folks just started using it. I never stopped them, never asked for a dime, even helped shovel snow off it in the winters. But now, they were trying to claim ownership over my land and treat me like I was a problem? That changed everything. So I pulled out the old property files again. I dug up the blueprints. Sure enough, clear as day, the boat ramp was entirely within my parcel, owned outright, never deeded or shared. Not even mentioned in any of their HOA formation documents, which meant they'd been accessing it by my permission alone. And that was something I could take back at any time. I didn't say anything right away. I waited, let the air stay quiet while I watched her next move. But in the back of my mind, I was already drafting a plan. If she wanted to play games with made-up authority, then maybe it was time she remembered who held the real keys to the lake. By the next weekend, the quiet had turned into tension. The lake was still. The sun still shimmered off the water. But the air? It felt heavy, like something was brewing. And it wasn't a storm, at least not the kind with rain. That Saturday morning, I walked down to the dock with a coffee mug in one hand and a drill in the other. I had made my decision. For the first time in decades, I was going to put a lock on the boat ramp gate. I had installed that gate years ago, back when my kids were little. It was never locked. Just a basic wooden swing gate to keep trucks from backing down too fast, or kids from getting too close without an adult. But now, I added a chain and a steel padlock. Nothing fancy. Just enough to say, access is no longer free. I printed and laminated a sign and hung it on the gate. Private ramp. Access by permission only. Simple. Direct. Legal. I didn't have to wait long. By noon, I heard tires skid on gravel, and sure enough, Karen's SUV rolled up to the edge of the fence like it had radar. She got out, stomped over, and stared at the sign like it had personally insulted her. "This is illegal," she snapped before I could even speak. "No," I said calmly. "This is private property. Always has been, and I've been generous for a long time. But the abuse ends today." She folded her arms. "You can't block access to a community resource. It's not a community resource. Check the land registry. It's on my deed. I'm the owner of the boat ramp, not the HOA. Not you." Her face twisted like she'd just bitten a lemon. "You can't just change the rules because you're upset. I didn't change anything. I just stopped giving away something for free." She sputtered. "You don't understand what this does. We have homeowners with boats, people who plan their summers around that ramp. Then they can talk to the HOA board," I said, locking the gate again. "And the board can talk to me." She stood there for a long second, clearly trying to come up with a retort that sounded smart. But she had nothing. She turned around, marched back to her car, and peeled out a lot in a cloud of dust. By Monday, my phone rang. It was Gerald, the neighbor from across the lake. "You really did it, huh?" he chuckled. "Karen just threw a fit at the HOA meeting. Said you were sabotaging the entire community." I laughed. "I'm not sabotaging anyone. They've been squatting on my access point for years. I just stopped letting it happen." "Well," he said, "you shook the beehive. They're going to want to negotiate." He was right. That Thursday, I got an official email from the HOA president, not Karen, thankfully. The new guy was younger, more reasonable sounding. He asked if I'd be open to discussing an arrangement for shared ramp access. I told him sure, as long as we met at the cabin on neutral ground. When he and 2 other board members showed up, they were polite, nervous but respectful. They asked how much I wanted for the HOA to lease use of the ramp for the season. I slid a piece of paper across the table with my proposal. Flat annual rent, covering maintenance and insurance, and exclusive weekend access priority for me and my family. One of them blinked. "You've really thought this through." "I have," I said, "because you all let one person turn a peaceful lake into a problem. Now I'm solving it." They agreed on the spot. No argument, no excuses. But here's the best part. When the first rent check arrived 2 weeks later, it was signed by the HOA treasurer, Karen, her signature, in blue ink, at the bottom of a payment made out to me, for access to the same boat ramp she once claimed I had no right to restrict. And just like that, the balance shifted. No lawsuits, no shouting matches, just one clear truth locked behind a gate with a simple sign. People will push until they hit a wall. And sometimes that wall is made of steel, covered in chain, and stamped with your name. Summer rolled in fully by the time the second rent check landed in my mailbox. This time, it wasn't hand-delivered or dropped off with any fuss. It came to the mail like any other bill. Same blue signature. Same small note in the corner that said asterisk for seasonal boat ramp access. Asterisk, no sarcasm, no protest. Just business. I couldn't help but smile. The same HOA that had accused me of violating noise ordinances and zoning rules was now quietly paying me for something they'd used freely for years. That ramp, that little slope path carved into the water by my grandfather's shovel, had become my strongest leverage, and they knew it. Word got around the neighborhood fast. People I'd never even spoken to before began waving when I passed them. One guy, maybe in his 60s, stopped his truck just to say thanks. "You handle that like a pro," he said. "Most of us just let them push us around." Turns out, I wasn't the only one who had problems with Karen over the years. There was the couple who got fined for putting a swing in their own front yard. A single mom who got threatened with violations over her son's skateboard ramp. A retired vet who was told his American flag was too large for neighborhood decorum. All those little stories started bubbling up, quiet frustrations that had built up under the surface. Until now. And suddenly, I was the guy who pushed back. That weekend, a few neighbors showed up at the cabin with folding chairs and a couple of coolers. They weren't looking for a party. They just wanted to sit, talk, and enjoy the view. Gerald brought his guitar. A couple of teens fished off the dock. Someone lit a portable grill. And before I knew it, we had an unofficial block gathering. Nobody was loud. Nobody got out of hand. It was calm, comfortable, and the funny part? Not a single HOA board member came to shut it down. They wouldn't dare. Karen still passed by from time to time. Never stopped. Never spoke. But you could tell it drove her crazy, watching people enjoy the place she once tried to control, while being forced to cut a check to guys she tried to chase off. One afternoon, I was walking back from the dock when I saw her standing near the gravel edge again. She wasn't taking pictures this time, just staring at the ramp with her arms folded. She looked up as I got closer. For a second, I thought she was going to say something, maybe an apology, maybe more nonsense. But instead, she just said, "Hope you're happy." I didn't blink. "I am." She nodded slowly, then added, "They think you're some kind of hero now." "I'm just someone who reads property lines." I said, "You should try it." That was the last conversation we had. The ramp became more than a launch point. It became a reminder, a line in the sand, a symbol of boundaries, real ones, the kind you can't twist or manipulate. And people respected that. Kids started coming down in the early evenings to fish. Parents brought kayaks on Sundays. A few elderly neighbors used it just to sit by the water with their feet dangling over the edge. I kept it open to those who respected the rules. Never locked them out. Just the HOA. Just the ones who thought they could take without asking. A month later, I installed a little bench at the top of the ramp. Just something simple. 2 planks and some concrete legs. I screwed a brass plate to it that read, "Respect the lake. Respect the owner." A week after that, someone left a folded thank you note under it. No name, just one sentence. Asterisk, "Thanks for showing us we don't have to be pushed around." Asterisk, it hit me harder than I expected. What started with a false 911 call and a clipboard war had turned into something bigger. Not revenge, not ego, just a quiet reminder that ownership still matters. That truth still holds weight. That when someone calls you a problem for enjoying what's yours, you don't argue. You just remind them they're standing on your land. By the time midsummer hit, the tone around the lake had completely changed. Not because I made some grand speech. Not because anyone handed over power. It shifted because the people finally saw that the HOA, specifically Karen, wasn't untouchable. And once that illusion cracked, everything started moving differently. It was almost funny how fast people stopped fearing those letters with the HOA logo at the top. I started hearing stories. One neighbor said he ignored a warning about his fence paint being the wrong shade of brown, and nothing happened. Another refused to trim the wildflowers by her mailbox, and for the first time in years, no one followed up. The scare tactics stopped working. But what surprised me most was how many people came to me, not just to vent, but to ask for help. "Can you help me figure out if my land is actually under the HOA? Do they really have the right to block our garden co-op? What happens if we just stop listening to her?" I didn't have all the answers, but I had the documents, property lines, maps, deeds, things most people didn't even know they could get access to. So I shared what I had. I helped folks file simple public record requests. And what they found made it clear. The HOA had been overreaching for years. Some properties weren't even technically under their control. Others had vague boundaries that the board had taken advantage of. Karen had operated on fear, not facts. And now, with a few papers and a little confidence, her empire was falling apart one address at a time. One afternoon, I was at the local hardware store picking up lumber, when a man I didn't recognize approached me near the checkout. He looked like he'd just come from work. Paint on his jeans, sunburn on his neck. "You the guy with the cabin in the ramp?" I nodded slowly. He stuck out his hand. I'm Chris. I live over on Ridgeview. Just wanted to say thanks. For what? I asked. For not folding. You saved us a lot of grief. He explained how the HOA had tried to shut down his weekend workshop for being a non-residential activity. He built birdhouses and small furniture in his garage. Harmless stuff. But Karen sent him 3 violation notices in a single month. I never knew I could fight it until you locked that gate, he said with a grin. Turns out that steel chain was louder than any protest. Even the new HOA board began to distance themselves from her. They stopped forwarding her complaints, stopped inviting her to meetings. One of the board members even called me directly, saying they were working on reducing Karen's role altogether. They called it restructuring, but I knew what that meant. They were pulling the power plug, one cord at a time. What really nailed it was the community meeting at the rec center in late July. I hadn't planned on attending. Honestly, I figured I'd stirred enough pots already, but Gerald talked me into it. Said I didn't need to speak, just sit in the back and listen. So I went, quiet, out of the way. The meeting started like all the others, budget talk, maintenance updates. But then came the open floor portion, and that's when things got interesting. Person after person stood up and voiced concerns. Not about neighbors, not about trash bins or lawn heights, about how the HOA had operated for years under fear and favoritism. One woman brought printed emails showing how Karen threatened to fine her for excessive potted plants. Another read a letter where she was warned her American flag was too visually aggressive. And then someone stood up and said my name. I don't think we'd be having this meeting if it weren't for what happened at the lake. That's when all eyes turned, even Karen's. She was seated near the front, arms crossed, expression blank. But I saw the shift in her eyes. Not anger. Not even embarrassment, just realization. Her time was up. The lake cabin she tried to control had become the spark that lit up years of quiet frustration. And now, the people she once ruled with rules and threats were no longer afraid to speak up. And all I'd done was lock a gate. The morning after that meeting, I was back at the lake. Same porch chair, same chip mug. But something felt different in the air. Lighter, maybe. The tension that had hovered for months was gone, and for the first time in a while, the water felt like it was mine again. A breeze rolled across the lake, and I could hear voices in the distance. Laughter, not loud, just real. Families enjoying their Saturday. Boats gliding out from docks, dogs barking at ducks. Normal stuff, peaceful stuff. And not once did I see that silver SUV circle the gravel path like it used to. Karen had vanished. Not completely, of course. She still lived up the hill, still drove the same car. But the power, the authority she wore like a crown, that had been stripped down to nothing. She wasn't writing letters anymore, wasn't stalking shoreline boundaries. Even the HOA board had removed her from the compliance committee, which everyone knew was just code for asterisk, the rule police. Asterisk, her clipboard was retired. It was strange how quickly the shift happened. 1 month, she's calling 911 over a barbecue. The next, she's barely seen it all. But the funny thing was, without her hovering, people didn't get rowdy. They didn't trash the place or throw wild parties. They respected the space more. The lake became cleaner. The boat ramp area stayed organized. Everyone understood the unspoken rule now. Respect goes both ways. I decided to make one more change. At the base of the ramp, where the gravel met the slope, I installed a small sign on a cedar post. Clean letters. Nothing loud. It read, "Use with care, maintained by the owner." No threats. No warnings. Just a quiet reminder that the ramp still had a steward. And within days, people started responding. One guy left a bundle of firewood next to my shed with a note. Asterisk. Thanks for letting us use the lake. Thought you could use this. Asterisk, another left behind a fresh can of sealant with a sticky note. Asterisk, saw a small crack in the dock. Figured this might help. Asterisk, it wasn't just about the ramp anymore. It was about trust. Even the HOA president swung by one evening, not with a complaint, just a cooler and 2 folding chairs. He said they were reworking their rules, simplifying them, cutting out the nonsense. No more garden fines. No more paint shade arguments, he said with a shrug. We just want to stop being the neighborhood villain. I respected that. We sat by the water for about an hour, talking about old lake stories, the history of the area, how things got so out of hand. He asked if I'd consider hosting a community fish fry later in the summer. Nothing fancy, just an informal event to rebuild a little trust. I told him maybe. I wasn't looking to be the local hero. I just wanted peace. But if a fish fry helped turn the page, I didn't see any harm in it. That night, I walked the edge of the property like I always do. Checked the dock ropes. Made sure the lights were off in the shed. I paused at the gate to the ramp. The lock was still there, but it hadn't been touched in weeks. People were getting the message loud and clear. This place wasn't for taking advantage. It was for sharing with respect. A car pulled up across the way. Headlights briefly swept over the water. It was Karen. She sat for a while, engine running, then turned the car off and just stared out at the lake. She didn't get out, didn't approach the gate, just sat there, maybe thinking, maybe regretting, maybe nothing at all. After a few minutes, the headlights flicked back on, and she drove off. And in that moment, I realized something important. Winning doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it's quiet. It's a mailbox with rent checks. It's a lake without shouting. It's a community that learns what the lines are and finally respects them. Mid-August brought a kind of warmth that wasn't just in the weather. The kind of warmth you feel when the tension fades, when neighbors start nodding at each other again, when the air doesn't feel like it's waiting to explode. The lake had never looked better. Searer, somehow, maybe it was the water. Maybe it was everything else. People had started coming around more regularly. Not to cause trouble, just to enjoy it. Quiet families with fishing rods. Elderly couples who'd been too nervous to walk near the ramp before. Teenagers who once blasted music from their boats now came down and asked, asterisk, mind if we launch real quick? Asterisk simple respect. That was all I'd ever wanted. Even the HOA, once a machine of threats and complaints, had changed its tone. They still held meetings, still sent out newsletters. But the language, it had softened, more pleas and community, less violations and discipline. It was like the whole structure had been reminded who they were supposed to serve. I kept things simple on my end. The ramp stayed locked unless someone asked. And if they did, I usually said yes, as long as they weren't part of the nonsense that kicked all this off. And believe it or not, most of them appreciated that system. They liked that it had boundaries now. That it wasn't just a free-for-all, but also wasn't being hoarded by someone on a power trip. And then one morning, I got a knock on the cabin door. It was Karen. I didn't recognize her right away. She wasn't dressed in the usual khaki and clipboard combo. No sunglasses, no tightened jaw, just jeans, a plain shirt, and a look that hovered somewhere between regret and resolve. I wanted to speak to you, if that's okay, she said. I stepped outside and shut the door behind me. What's on your mind? She looked around the porch, looked out at the lake. This place, it's beautiful. I waited. I think I let things get out of hand, she finally said. With the HOA, with you, I thought I was protecting the community. But I crossed lines. I wasn't sure how to respond. So I didn't. I just let her keep going. I didn't realize how much damage it caused until people stopped talking to me. Until they stopped coming to meetings. And when I saw you lock that ramp, it hit me that I was the one out of line. Not you. She paused. I don't expect you to forgive me, she added quickly. I just wanted to say it, out loud, because no one else will. For a moment, all I heard was the wind moving through the trees, then the soft lap of water against the dock. You're right, I said finally. You did cross lines, but owning up to it? That matters. She nodded, eyes still fixed on the horizon. Do you want me to step down from the board officially? She asked. I shrugged. That's between you and your neighbors. But maybe instead of quitting, you could just listen more. Learn where your power stops and where other people's peace begins. She smiled faintly. Fair enough. She turned to leave, but paused halfway down the steps. The fish fry, if that's still happening. I'd like to bring something. Maybe desserts. I nodded. That'd be fine. She left without saying more, and I sat back down in my porch chair with the same old mug in my hand. That conversation didn't erase what happened, but it didn't need to. The damage had been done. The point had been made. What mattered now was that even Karen had come around. Slowly, quietly, maybe a little late, but still. That evening, I watched as a few kids carried kayaks down to the ramp. They waved at me without fear. I waved back. No clipboard in sight. No calls being made. No shouting about rules or regulations. Just water, paddles, and the sound of laughter echoing off the lake. The kind of peace you only earn after a storm. The night of the fish fry brought more people than I expected. Lawn chairs lined the slope down to the dock. Coolers clinked open. Kids darted between folding tables with paper plates, chasing one another like they'd lived on the lake forever. It didn't feel like a protest or some hard-won political event. It felt like what a community should have been the whole time. Neighbors showing up for each other without drama, without posturing, without fear. The air smelled like grilled catfish and smoked corn. Gerald had brought his old rusty grill, the one with one working wheel and a leg made from a cinder block. No one cared. It hissed and popped and smoked like it had something to prove, and it did its job better than any fancy new model from the city. Someone had brought a Bluetooth speaker, but the music was soft. Country classics. No one shouted. No one cursed. It felt right, natural, honest. And then Karen showed up. For a split second, the mood changed. Not angry, just quiet. People turned their heads. A few whispers. Some subtle eye rolls. But she didn't come with a clipboard or a complaint. She walked slow, carrying a foil-covered tray in her arms like it was a peace offering. And it kind of was. She didn't try to push her way into the crowd. Just found a spot at one of the side tables and quietly set her tray down. A label on it said, * lemon bars, nut-free. * she even brought napkins. Matching ones. Gerald caught my eye from across the lawn. Raised an eyebrow. I just gave a shrug. What was I supposed to say? The woman who once called the police over too many hot dogs at my cabin now baked treats for the neighborhood. After a while, folks warmed up. A few brave souls tried the lemon bars and gave her a polite nod. Someone said thank you. Slowly, she started blending into the evening like anyone else. When the sun dipped low and the lake turned orange, I walked to the edge of the dock and looked out. That same familiar peace washed over me. The kind that only comes when you know exactly where you stand and who stands with you. Behind me, voices were laughing. Someone told a story about how the HOA once tried to fine them for hanging laundry outside. Another joke that Karen's clipboard had probably retired to Florida. Even Karen laughed at that one. Not loudly, but it was real. Maybe the first honest laugh I'd heard from her. As the night rolled on, I noticed something else. A kid, probably 10 years old, stood near the ramp, holding a fishing pole. He looked unsure, like he wasn't sure he was allowed to be there. I walked over and said, "You fish?" He nodded. "A little. My dad said not to go near the ramp, unless someone said it was okay." "Well," I said, "you've got permission. Catch something big." His face lit up. He ran back to his dad with a grin, pole bouncing behind him. That was the whole point. Not to hoard the lake. Not to block people out. Just to protect what was mine until the right people came around to treat it with respect. By the time stars took over the sky, people started packing up. Folding chairs clicked closed. Coolers zipped shut. But no one seemed in a rush. It wasn't like they were afraid of staying too long or worried about someone writing them up for it. Karen stayed until the end. As she walked past me to head to her car, she stopped just long enough to say, "Thanks for not turning your back on all of us." I nodded. "Thanks for finally showing up as a neighbor." She smiled. No bitterness, just tired honesty. When the last car pulled away and the night grew quiet again, I sat back down in my favorite chair on the porch. Same lake, same trees, but everything felt a little more whole, a little more grounded, like this place had gone through something and come out stronger on the other side. The ramp stayed locked, but the gate stayed open for those who knew how to knock.